I knew something was wrong before I even touched the door handle. My son's car was in my driveway, on a Tuesday afternoon, when he was supposed to be at work across town. I hadn't called ahead. Nobody knew I was coming home early. And yet there he was, sitting in my living room, completely still, with a look on his face that I had never seen before in 27 years of being his father. Not surprise, not relief, just calculation. That was the moment I understood that the man I raised had been planning something, and my wife, the woman he called Mom, was already in a hospital bed 30 minutes away. Before we dive back into the story, take a quick moment to tell me where you're listening from down in the comments, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Because trust me, what happens next is something you'll want to stay for. Let me tell you something about 27 years of marriage. 27 years. That's not just a number. That's 27 winters, 27 rounds of tax season, 27 years of knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee without asking. You don't just know your spouse after that long. You feel them. You feel when something is off the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. Not in your head, in your chest. Deep, low, wrong. That's where it lives. My name is Raymond. Raymond Calloway. I am 56 years old. I have lived in Chicago my entire life. Born on the South Side, raised on the South Side, and I have been going to the same barbershop on 79th Street since 1991 because some things you just don't change. I work in logistics management for a regional freight company, which sounds boring until you realize it means I have spent the better part of 3 decades making sure that when things are supposed to arrive, they arrive. I am a man who believes in systems, in order, in making sure the pieces are where they're supposed to be, which is exactly why what I walked into that October afternoon nearly took me completely apart. I was not supposed to be home. I was supposed to be in Minneapolis for a 3-day industry summit. Freight and distribution, nothing glamorous, but it paid well and got me out of the office. The summit got cut short. Our keynote presenter had some kind of family situation on day 1, the whole schedule collapsed, and by 2 in the afternoon on Tuesday, I was already at the airport watching my gate number appear on the departures board. I did not call my wife Denise. I thought about it. My thumb was literally over her name in my contacts. And then I thought, no, I'll just go home. Maybe stop at the jerk chicken place she loves on 47th. Maybe actually sit across from her at dinner without either of us being half asleep. It had been a while. I was feeling something close to good. I should have known better. 27 years of marriage teaches you a lot of things. One of them is that when you start feeling too good about something, that's usually when the floor gives way. Now, let me be honest with you about something, and I think this is important. I want you to really sit with this because I didn't understand it at the time. When good things are about to go bad, there are almost always signs. Little ones. Things that don't scream at you. Things that just whisper. And the reason most of us miss them is not because we're stupid. It's because we're trusting. We believe what we want to believe about the people we love. We fill in the gaps with the best possible explanation because the alternative is something we're not ready to look at yet. I was not ready. I had not been ready for a long time. I just didn't know it yet. The first thing I noticed when I turned onto my block was Marcus's car sitting in my driveway. Marcus is 28 years old. He has been married to his wife Alicia for going on 3 years. They have a condo in Wicker Park. Nice place, 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen. I know because I helped them pick it out, and I co-signed on the financing like a man who believed in his son completely. Marcus does not do spontaneous visits. Marcus does not do pop-ins. Marcus barely does scheduled dinners without reminding twice. So seeing his car parked in my driveway on a random Tuesday afternoon in October did not register as sweet. It registered as strange. The kind of strange that sits in the back of your throat. I sat in my car for a long moment before I got out. I remember looking at the windshield and talking out loud to myself, which I understand is a sign of something. I just haven't figured out what yet. I said, "Raymond, why is your son's car in your driveway on a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon?" I had no answer, so I grabbed my bag, walked to the door, and went inside. The second thing I noticed was the quiet. Now, I want to be very specific about what kind of quiet it was, because there are many kinds. There is the quiet of an empty house, which has a lightness to it. There is the quiet of someone sleeping, which has a kind of warmth. And then there is the other kind, the thick kind, the kind of quiet that is not the absence of noise but the presence of something else entirely, the kind that sits in the air like it owns the place. That was the quiet I walked into, heavy, wrong, deliberate. Marcus and Alicia were seated in my living room, on my couch, together, and I need you to understand what I mean when I tell you what they were doing, or rather what they were not doing. They were not watching television. They were not on their phones. They were not talking. They were just sitting. The way two people sit in a doctor's waiting room when they already know the diagnosis, and they're just waiting for the official words. I have never in my life seen my son sit still without a screen in front of him, but there he was, hands in his lap, back straight, eyes forward until the moment he heard me come in. He looked up, and I want you to hold on to this moment because this is the moment that changed my entire understanding of what was happening. He was not surprised. My son, who had no reason to expect me home a full day early, who should have jumped out of his skin when he heard my key in the door, looked up at me with the slow, steady blink of a man who had already run this scene in his mind. There was no shock, no wide eyes. No, Dad, what are you doing here? Just a look, a calculated, preparing for what comes next look that I had never seen on my child's face before in my life. Alicia smiled, and I'm telling you, that smile had no business being on anyone's face in that room at that moment. That smile belonged to a different conversation in a different house on a different day. It was completely out of place, and some part of me knew it immediately, even though the rest of me wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I said, "Marcus, what's going on? Where's your mother?" He cleared his throat, and even that small sound, that tiny clearing of the throat, felt rehearsed. He said, "Dad, hey, we were actually about to call you." "Were you?" I said. Flat, not a question. He said, "Mom had an episode this morning. She's at Northwestern Memorial. She's stable, though." So I did not hear anything after Northwestern Memorial. I was back out the front door before he finished the sentence. I know I grabbed my keys. I believe I said something. I could not tell you what. There is a particular kind of shock that works like a circuit breaker. It cuts the power to everything except the one thing you need to keep moving. I needed to get to my wife. Everything else went dark. If you're watching this right now, and you've ever had one of those moments where your body moves before your brain gives the order, you know exactly what I mean. And if you've never had that moment, I genuinely hope you never do. But if it ever comes for you, here is what I want you to know. You are going to be okay on the other side of it. You just have to keep moving through. I called my best friend on the way to the hospital, Gerald Watkins. Gerald and I go back to junior high school. We played basketball together, got through college together, and Gerald was the best man at my wedding 27 years ago. If there is anyone on this earth who will say the true thing to me without patting it first, it's Gerald. He picked up on the second ring. "Ray, what's happening?" "Denise is at Northwestern," I said. I just got home and Marcus and Alicia were sitting in my living room, like two people waiting for news they already had. There was a silence. Then Gerald said, "What do you mean they already had it?" I said, "Gerald, my son did not flinch when I walked through that door. I was supposed to be in Minneapolis." Another silence, longer this time. Then very quietly he said, "Raymond, stay calm." "I'm calm," I said. "No," he said. "You're driving in Chicago traffic, and that is not the same thing as calm." He had a point. I made it to Northwestern Memorial in 11 minutes from my house. I will leave it at that. Dr. Patricia Osei was the attending physician who met me at the nurses' station. She was a composed woman, mid-50s, the kind of doctor who has delivered difficult news enough times that she no longer wastes words on softening what cannot be softened. I respected that immediately. She said, "Mr. Calloway, your wife was brought in this morning. She presented with significant disorientation, kidney stress markers, and elevated toxicity levels in her blood work that we are still analyzing." I said, "Toxicity levels." She said, "Yes. I want to be direct with you. The pattern we're seeing is not consistent with an acute illness. The indicators suggest something cumulative, something that has been building over a period of time. Building. That word. It didn't just land, it sank. Like something dropped into deep water that you know is still going down even after you can't see it anymore. I held the edge of that nurse's station, and I said very carefully, "Dr. Osei, are you telling me that someone may have done this to my wife deliberately?" She held my gaze without blinking. She said, "I'm telling you we need more answers, and I believe you do too." I went in to see Denise. And listen, I have seen my wife in every condition imaginable over 27 years. I have seen her exhausted after double shifts, radiant in the morning before she's had her coffee even though she insists that is not possible, furious at me in a way that made me genuinely reassess every decision I had made in the previous 48 hours. I have seen her laugh until she cried at a movie she'd already seen 3 times. I have seen her heartbroken and I have seen her triumphant, and I thought I knew every version of this woman. I was not prepared for what was lying in that hospital bed. She looked like someone had turned down a dimmer switch on everything that made her Denise. The color was wrong. The stillness was wrong. The machines and the IV and the soft beeping of monitors that should not have been anywhere near my wife. All of it wrong. She looked impossibly small. Denise Calloway, who once called the city alderman's office 4 times in one afternoon over a pothole outside our house and did not stop calling until they sent someone, looked impossibly small in that bed. I sat down beside her. I took her hand, and I made her a promise that I meant with everything I had. I told her I was not leaving until I knew exactly what had happened to her and exactly who was responsible. I don't make promises lightly, ask Gerald. Ask anyone who knows me. When I say something, I mean it. I walked back out to the waiting area. Marcus and Alicia had arrived. Of course they had. Marcus stood up when he saw me, and he had the posture of a man bracing for something, arms slightly out, weight forward, the body language of someone anticipating a confrontation. He said, "Dad, we need to talk. There's a lot you don't know yet." I held up one hand. Just one. And whatever was on my face in that moment communicated something clearly enough that he stopped. Mid-sentence. Just stopped. I said, "Not right now." Then I walked to the far corner of that waiting room, sat down, pulled out my phone, and started doing the one thing they were absolutely not expecting. I began locking every account Marcus had any access to. Every single one. Methodically, quietly, the way a man who works in logistics locks down a compromised route. You don't announce it. You just seal it. When the notifications started hitting their phones, and I knew they would, because that's how bank alerts work, I watched Alicia first. That smile she'd been carrying since I walked into my living room earlier that afternoon. It left her face like someone had pulled a plug. Just gone. And that was the moment. That was the exact moment I understood that whatever was happening to my wife, I had just announced that I was not going to be handled. And now we were playing a different game entirely. Now, if I'm being honest with you, and I'm always honest on this channel, that moment in the waiting room scared me more than almost anything else that day, not because of what I did, but because of what their faces told me when I did it. Fear does something very specific to a guilty person's face. It looks different from the fear of an innocent person who's confused. An innocent person looks confused and then angry. A guilty person looks like they're calculating. They're not reacting. They're responding. And both of those faces in that waiting room were responding. That told me everything. Let me tell you something about denial. I need to talk about this for a moment because I think it matters for anyone watching who might be in a situation where their gut is telling them something and their heart is telling them something different. Denial is not weakness. Denial is actually a very intelligent system. It protects you from pain that your mind has decided you are not yet equipped to handle. The problem is that denial doesn't know when to turn itself off. It will keep protecting you right up until the moment the thing you are being protected from walks through your front door. I had been living in a version of denial about Marcus for longer than I was willing to admit that night. Not about anything dramatic, just small things. The way certain conversations felt slightly off. The way certain requests had started to feel slightly calculated. Nothing I could point to. Nothing I could name. Just that low, deep wrongness in the chest that I kept explaining away because he was my son, and I loved him, and I wanted to be wrong. Sitting in that hospital parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, with my wife hooked up to machines 1 floor above me, I stopped wanting to be wrong. I called Gerald. He answered before the first ring finished. "Talk to me," he said. "She looks terrible, Gerald," I said, and my voice did something at the end of that sentence that I'm not going to describe further. The doctor used the word cumulative, toxicity that builds over months. Not sudden, not accidental, Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ray, cumulative means deliberate." I said, "I know what it means," he said, and Marcus and Alicia were there. I said, "They're in the waiting room right now." Silence. The kind that means the person on the other end is turning over the same stone you've been staring at and trying to find a different explanation under it. There wasn't one. Then Gerald said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, "Brother, I need you to think about who had access to Denise's food and her drinks and her medications and her vitamins every single day for the past several months. I need you to think very carefully about that." And that's when it came back to me. 4 months ago, Denise had slipped on the back porch steps. Just a sprain, nothing serious, but enough that she was moving slowly and carefully for a few weeks. Marcus had come to me almost immediately with a suggestion. Alicia worked part-time, had a flexible schedule, would be happy to come by every morning before Denise's day started, help with breakfast, make sure she took her supplements, just give her a hand while she was recovering. At the time I remember thinking, with genuine warmth, that I had underestimated my daughter-in-law. I told Gerald about it on the phone a few weeks in. I said, "I think I had Alicia wrong. I would very much like to travel back in time and have a conversation with myself about that statement." I went back inside the hospital. Marcus was standing by the vending machines with his arms folded, wearing an expression I can only describe as a man trying very hard to perform innocence and not quite hitting the mark. He was trying too hard. Everything was slightly too deliberate. The crossed arms, the concerned brow, the measured tone when he spoke, all of it a degree off. The way a picture is hung on the wall at a slight angle, and you can't quite say why it bothers you, but it does. Alicia was seated with her phone face down on her lap. Now, I have to explain why this detail mattered. Alicia is physically inseparable from her phone. I have watched that woman scroll through it during a Thanksgiving grace. I have watched her check it at a funeral. A phone placed face down voluntarily, by Alicia specifically, meant one of two things. Either she was expecting a call she did not want me to see, or she had already received one. Neither option was good. I sat directly across from both of them. Marcus said, "Dad, I know this looks bad." I said, "Do you, Marcus? Walk me through exactly how you think this looks. I'd genuinely like to hear it." He shifted. He said, "Mom has been having health issues for a few months. We were trying to help. Alicia was coming by in the mornings, making sure she ate, making sure she took her vitamins," I said. "Her vitamins," he said. "Yes." I said, "Which vitamins, Marcus? She takes 3 different supplements. Which ones was Alicia giving her?" He blinked. Then he looked at Alicia. Alicia looked at her lap. That 3-second exchange. That 3-second look between two people who suddenly realized they were standing on ice, and had just heard it crack underneath them. That exchange told me everything I needed to know and confirmed everything I had been hoping was not true. I stood up. I said his name once. The way my own father used to say mine when I was 17 years old, and about to do something I couldn't take back, quietly. Just the name, Marcus. Go home. He started to speak. Go home. He did. I sat in that waiting room for the rest of the night with terrible coffee and a phone, and I did what any man would do when he suspects that the people who were supposed to love his wife have been slowly poisoning her instead. I started going through every financial record I could access. Now, I want to be clear about something. I am not a forensic accountant. I am a man who still occasionally prints bank statements because I don't entirely trust the app. But even I could see what had been happening. The withdrawals started small. 150 here, 250 there. Always below a threshold. Always the kind of amount that, individually, makes you think maybe Denise just picked up something at the store and forgot to mention it. But when I added them up, across 5 months, we were sitting at just under $10,000. From a joint emergency account that Marcus had limited access to for what I had told him was for genuine family emergencies only. $10,000. Small bites, patient, designed not to be noticed. I called Gerald at 2:30 in the morning. He answered like he'd been awake for hours. I said, 9,800, Gerald. 5 months. The joint emergency account. Small withdrawals, consistent pattern, never enough to trigger an alert. Gerald went quiet. Then he said, "Raymond, that is not impulsive. That is not a mistake. Someone sat down and worked out exactly how to do that without being caught. My son, I said. And I will tell you that saying those 2 words out loud in that waiting room at 2:30 in the morning was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life. My son sat down and planned this. We don't know everything yet, Gerald said carefully. Yes, we do, I said. I know. He didn't argue. Because we both knew. The next morning, Dr. Osei found me in that waiting room, in the same chair, looking like a man who had survived something but wasn't sure yet what. She sat down beside me. Doctors don't always do that. When they do, it means the news is real, and they want to be human when they deliver it. She said, Mr. Calloway. The full panel came back. I said, tell me straight. She said, your wife has elevated levels of a compound consistent with prolonged ingestion of a specific toxic substance. The levels indicate consistent exposure over several months. Her kidneys are under significant stress. We've begun treatment, and I want you to hear me clearly. We caught this. She has a strong path to recovery. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 breath. Then I said, Dr. Osei, if someone were doing this intentionally, how would they have delivered it? She paused. Then, very carefully, as if measuring each word, she said, it could be introduced through food, through beverages, or through supplements, particularly powdered supplements that dissolve without taste or color. I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. I heard Marcus's voice in my head. Alicia was coming by every morning, making sure she took her vitamins. My chair scraped the floor loud enough that 2 people across the waiting room looked up. Dr. Osei put a hand on my arm and I stopped. I said, I need to make some phone calls. She nodded. She understood. She had understood since yesterday. I called my attorney first, Diane Beaumont. Diane has been practicing law in Chicago for 32 years, and she is the kind of woman who, when you call her with a situation like this one, does not gasp and does not say bless your heart, and does not tell you everything is going to be fine. She says, tell me everything, start at the beginning and do not leave anything out, which is exactly what I needed. I told her all of it, the withdrawals, the supplements, the toxicology report, the timing, the morning visits, Marcus's face when I walked through the door, Alicia's phone face down, all of it. She was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, Raymond, do not touch anything in that house. Do not confront them. Do not post, do not hint, do not say a word to anyone outside of me and Gerald. Can you do that? I said yes. She said, good. Because when this lands, I want it to land like a building, not a rock, a building. I said, Diane, I want them to feel every inch of it. She said, honey, by the time I'm done filing, they'll feel the square footage. I did not smile, but something in me that had been paralyzed for 36 hours finally, quietly, unclenched. And I want to stop here for just a moment. Because if you are someone watching this who is dealing with a situation where your gut is telling you something is wrong and the people around you are telling you that you're overreacting, I want you to hear this directly. The moment Raymond called his attorney was not a moment of aggression. It was a moment of protection. There is a difference between revenge and consequence. Revenge is hot and reckless, and it usually costs you something. Consequence is cold and careful, and it puts the cost exactly where it belongs. Raymond wasn't looking for revenge in that hospital waiting room. He was building consequence. And that difference is everything. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life, and I have had some long stretches. Denise was improving slowly. Dr. Osei called it cautious optimism, which is doctor language, for we think she's going to be okay, but we are not going to say that out loud yet. The treatment was working. Her kidney markers were improving, and on the 2nd day of her hospitalization, she opened her eyes, looked at me sitting beside her, and said in the roughest, most exhausted version of the voice I have loved for 27 years, Raymond, you look like you slept in a hospital chair. I said, I did. She said, why would you do that? I said, because you're here. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said very quietly, it's bad, isn't it? I didn't answer with words. I held her hand tighter. She read that. She's always been able to read me. She said, tell me later, just stay right now. So I stayed. I stayed right there. And something that had been clenched in the center of my chest for 3 days loosened just slightly. I didn't tell her everything yet. She needed to heal first. But I told her she was safe. I told her I knew what had happened. I told her everything was being handled. She looked at me with those sharp eyes of hers, the ones that have always been able to see past whatever I think I'm hiding, and she said quietly, "It was Marcus, wasn't it?" Not a question, a conclusion. The conclusion of a woman who had probably been running that same calculation quietly for longer than I knew, and had been hoping to be wrong. I didn't confirm it with words. I just held her hand. She closed her eyes and said, "I always knew that boy had my stubbornness, but none of my conscience." And even in that moment, even in an ICU with machines beeping and my heart in pieces, I recognize the particular way Denise Calloway says the most devastating thing possible, like it's just a passing observation. She has always been the most formidable person I know. Watching her lie there had been the hardest part of all of this. Watching her come back was the only part that mattered. On day 4, Diane called me with news that rearranged my entire understanding of what we were actually dealing with. Gerald, God bless that man, had done some quiet footwork on his own. He had located surveillance records from a pharmacy in Evanston far enough from our neighborhood to not be coincidental, close enough to confirm intent. Marcus had visited that pharmacy on 3 separate occasions over 4 months, purchasing a specific supplement brand each time, always paying with cash, always alone, except once. The third visit, the exterior security camera caught Alicia sitting in the passenger seat of his car in the parking lot. The supplement in question contained a compound that, in concentrated doses administered consistently over time, produced exactly the toxicity profile that Dr. Osei had found in Denise's blood work. Diane also had the bank records. She had the full withdrawal timeline. She had documentation from the estate attorney, because there was an estate attorney involved. And this is where it all came into focus in a way that made the rest of it make terrible sense. 6 weeks before Denise collapsed, she had visited an estate attorney alone, without telling me. Now, knowing Denise, my first instinct about that was that she was planning something she didn't want me to know about yet, because Denise does not do things halfway, and she does not reveal a plan before it is complete. She had been quietly building a literacy foundation for kids in underserved communities on Chicago's South Side for 2 years. A real foundation, with structure and funding and a plan. She had been growing it in secret because she wanted to walk through our door one day and present it as a finished thing, not a concept. That was Denise entirely. She had gone to the estate attorney to update her life insurance policy and redirect the beneficiary, removing Marcus from the secondary position and redirecting the policy, which was worth $2.1 million, entirely to her foundation. Marcus had found out. I still don't fully know how. But he had found out that his mother was 30 days away from finalizing paperwork that would remove him from a $2 million policy, and instead of calling her, instead of sitting down with her like a grown man and having a conversation about it, he and Alicia had decided that the most efficient solution was to make sure Denise didn't survive those 30 days. I sat with that information for a very long time. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I sat in that hospital waiting room chair and let the full, complete, honest weight of it press down on me. My son had decided that his inheritance was worth more than his mother's life. He had sat down with his wife, and they had together chosen a method, chosen a timeline, acquired the materials, and begun executing a plan designed to kill the woman who had raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him, and was using her own money to build schools for other people's children. I will not pretend that sitting with that information was anything other than what it was. It was the worst thing I have ever had to understand about another human being, and it was my son. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and made a decision. I was not going to be loud about this. I was not going to be messy. I was going to be methodical, thorough, and patient. The same qualities I had spent 30 years applying to my work. I was going to apply every single one of them to this. Diane was already ahead of me. She had the pharmacy receipts, the bank records, the estate attorney timeline, and Marcus's truly extraordinary contribution to his own case. The fact that he had called the estate attorney's office posing as Denise's personal assistant to check on the status of the policy update, and had left his own cell phone number as a callback, his own personal cell phone. The number listed in my phone under Marcus' son. I want you to sit with that. This was a man who had spent 4 months executing a slow, careful, calculated plan and then called the estate attorney from his own personal cell phone. When Gerald told me, I stared at the wall for about 15 seconds. Then I said, "Gerald, did I raise a criminal mastermind or the world's most confident idiot?" Gerald said. Raymond. Somehow it's both. I almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a laugh I had managed in 5 days. They came to the hospital on day 5. Together. Carrying flowers, which I will give them credit for because at least the gesture made a kind of sense even if the people making it did not. Marcus walked in first, saw me standing in the corridor outside Denise's room, deployed a smile that stopped about 3 feet short of his eyes, and said, "Dad, how is she? We've been so worried about her." I looked at him, then at Alicia, then back at him. I said, "She's awake, she's talking. Doctor Osei says she's going to make a full recovery." Something moved behind his eyes. Very fast, very brief. It was not relief. It was not joy. It was the specific micro-expression of a person whose plan has just collapsed and who is immediately recalculating what comes next. I know what relief looks like on my son's face. I have seen it my whole life. That was not it. Alicia said, "That's such wonderful news, Raymond." I said, "The police are on their way." Just like that. The same tone I might use to say it's supposed to snow tomorrow. The color left Marcus's face in a way that I can only describe as medically rapid. He said, "What?" I said, "Diane Beaumont filed this morning. Pharmacy records, bank records. Dr. Osei's toxicology report. The call to the estate attorney from your cell phone, Marcus. All of it, every piece, a very clean package." Alicia made a sound I cannot describe, except to say it was the sound of a composed person becoming suddenly very uncomposed. Marcus said, "Dad, just let me just for a second, just listen because I need you to." I said, "There is no sentence. There is no sentence in the English language that covers what you did. So I need you to stop talking now." He opened his mouth. I held up one hand. He closed it. I said, "The flowers are nice. Someone else will bring them to her." They were arrested in the hospital parking lot 40 minutes later. Diane had timed the filing with the precision of someone who understood that timing is not just strategy, it is a message. They were still holding the flowers. Marcus tried to talk his way through it. Marcus has always believed that if he just finds the right combination of words, he can change any outcome. The officers were not interested in his combination of words. Alicia went quiet in a way that very clearly indicated she was already thinking about a different kind of conversation with a different kind of lawyer. Gerald appeared beside me at the window. I have no idea when he arrived. He simply materialized the way he always does when something is happening that matters. We watched together in silence. After a moment, Gerald said, "How are you feeling, Ray?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Like I aged 15 years in 5 days. Like I want to sleep for approximately 1 month. Like I am the saddest I have ever been in my life and simultaneously more certain about everything I just did than I have been about anything." Gerald nodded. He said, "And Denise?" I looked back down the corridor toward her room. I could see the light through the small window in her door. I said, "Denise is going to be fine. Denise was always going to be fine. She married me, which means she can survive anything." Gerald laughed. A real laugh, the kind that fills a corridor. And for one moment, in the middle of the worst week of my entire life, the weight lifted just enough to breathe. This is where I want to talk to you directly, because this story is not just about Raymond and Denise and what Marcus and Alicia chose to do. This story is about something that happens in families more often than anyone wants to admit, and it happens quietly, and it builds slowly, and by the time most people notice it, significant damage has already been done. Financial exploitation of a spouse or parent is one of the most underreported crimes in this country. It happens in small amounts over long periods of time, and it is designed specifically to stay below the level of attention. If you have a joint account that another family member has any access to, review it today. Not tomorrow. Today. Look for the pattern, not the amount. The pattern is what gives it away. And if someone in your life has unusual access to the daily routine of someone you love, to their food, their medication, their supplements, pay attention to that access. Ask specific questions. Not because family members cannot be trusted, but because love is not the same as naivety, and protecting the people you love requires you to stay awake. 3 months later, Denise came home. She walked through the front door of our house on a Saturday morning in January when the Chicago light was doing that particular low, silver thing it does in winter, that somehow makes everything look both cold and beautiful at the same time. She stood in the hallway and looked around the way you look around, a place you have been away from longer than you should have been, like you're cataloging it, like you're reminding yourself it's real. Then she turned to me and said, "Raymond, this entryway needs new tile." I said, "I just had that tile put in 4 years ago." She said, "It was the wrong choice." I said, "Denise, I spent $600 on that tile." She said, "That explains why it's wrong." I looked at the tile. I looked at her. I pulled up the number of a contractor on my phone, because some arguments are not about the tile. Some arguments are about standing in your entryway arguing about tile with the person you were almost never going to argue with again, and those arguments, you win them by losing on purpose. The trial was everything Diane promised. 11 days. Evidence that was airtight from every angle. The jury took just under 5 hours. Marcus and Alicia were convicted on attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. The sentencing was significant. I won't give you a number because the number isn't really the point. The point is that when the verdict was read, I was sitting in that courtroom next to Denise, who was holding my hand with a grip that could have stopped traffic. And when it was over, she leaned close and said very quietly, "I want deep dish." I said, "Right now?" She said, "Raymond, I have been thinking about Giordano's for 3 months. Do not test me on this." So we got deep dish. Gerald came. Diane came. Dr. Patricia Osei came, because Denise had apparently won her over completely during the recovery, which honestly surprised no one. We sat around a table on a cold January night in Chicago, and we ate, and we laughed, and I watched my wife gesture dramatically, while telling a story to Patricia about the tile argument, making herself sound entirely reasonable, and I thought, there she is. There's Denise. There's the woman I have been looking for since the moment I walked into that hospital room and couldn't find her. There she is. I said at the beginning of this story that I came home early, and for a moment I wished I hadn't. I take that back completely. I am grateful for every single minute of that early flight. If the summit had run its full schedule, if I had stayed in Minneapolis one more night the way I was supposed to, Denise would not have made it. The doctors were clear about that. The toxicity had reached a level where another few days would have been irreversible. I would have come home to a house that looked normal from the outside, and I would never have known why. So no, I do not wish I had stayed away. I wish my son had been the man I believed I was raising. I wish he had been the man who actually hugged me at Christmas 3 years ago and told me he was proud to have me as his father. I believed that. I held that. I may have told Gerald about it afterward. But you cannot control what a person chooses to become when they think no one is paying attention. You can only control what you do when you find out. I came home early. I turned on the lights. I made sure that every person who had put their hands on my wife faced exactly what they had done. In a courtroom. On the record. With evidence that left no room for anything else. That is not revenge. That is consequence. And there is not a day that goes by that I regret making sure it landed exactly where it belonged. Drop a comment below with the number 1 if you think Raymond did exactly the right thing by going quiet and building the case instead of confronting Marcus directly. Drop a 2 if you think family, even in a situation like this one, deserves some form of second chance or direct conversation before legal action. Drop a 3 if something in this story felt close to home. If you've ever had that moment where your gut told you something was wrong about someone you loved, and you had to decide whether to trust it. And wherever you're watching from right now, drop your city or country in the comments, and tell me what time it is where you are. I read every single one of those. It never gets old seeing where you all are when you find this channel. This story is a fictional narrative inspired by real patterns and cases, completely rewritten from the ground up in a new voice, with new characters, a new setting, and new details. It is not based on any specific real person or event, and any resemblance to actual individuals is coincidental. The purpose is to explore human behavior, family dynamics, and consequences through storytelling. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. This community is built on stories that are real in the ways that matter: the emotions, the stakes, the choices people make when they think no one will find out. We're here every week, and we're glad you're here with us.